Brenda, an international model who was at the height of her career, was on her way to another important fashion show. With her busy schedule, constant travel and the glamour of the catwalk, it was easy to get lost in the frenetic pace of her life. But on that rainy afternoon, as his car crossed the city's busy streets, something caught his attention. Suddenly, everything stopped. Outside, in the middle of the storm, a ragged young woman was holding a baby, trying to protect it from the torrential rain with an old piece of cloth. That scene, so simple and at the same time so impactful, made Brenda question everything. Her life, her choices, and what really mattered. Was she on the right path? Or had he strayed too far from what was truly essential? Brenda has always been a strikingly beautiful young woman, even in her small rural Texas town where opportunities to stand out were limited. She grew up in a simple family, where life was marked by predictable routines and modest dreams. From an early age, Brenda knew she wanted more than what her environment could offer, but she never imagined her desire to explore the world would take her this far. Everything changed when, on an ordinary afternoon, while walking through the city center, she was approached by a talent scout who was passing by. This woman, with an experienced and critical eye, saw something special in Brenda, something that could shine on the most prestigious catwalks in the world. Initially, Brenda was skeptical, thinking it was too good to be true. However, after some conversations and research, she realized that this was a real opportunity, a chance to completely change her life. Brenda knew that accepting this proposal would mean leaving behind everything she knew: her family, her friends, and the peaceful life she had always had. But the prospect of becoming an international model, of traveling to places she had only seen in films and magazines, was irresistible. With the reluctant but eventual support of her parents, Brenda embarked on this new journey, unsure of where it would take her. Before long, Brenda was introduced to the world of fashion. Her first jobs took her to cities like New York and Los Angeles, where she began to gain prominence. His face quickly became familiar in advertising campaigns and editorials in renowned magazines. The young woman from Texas was becoming a rising star, attracting the attention of renowned stylists and photographers. Each step she took into this new world seemed to take her further away from her roots, but Brenda was determined to make the most of this opportunity. She knew the fashion industry was competitive and demanding, and she was willing to work hard to stay on top. Despite the success, the transition to this new life was not easy. Brenda faced challenges she never imagined: pressures to conform to impossible standards, the loneliness of constant travel, and the need to maintain an impeccable public image. The glitz and glamour of the catwalks hid a reality of hard work and personal sacrifice. However, Brenda was undeterred. She knew she was living many girls' dreams and worked hard to stay focused on her goals. The young model was willing to pay the price for success, even if it meant giving up part of her own identity. But as Brenda climbed the career ladder, the emotional distance between her and her family grew. Calls home became less frequent, visits rarer. She felt like she was moving away not only physically, but also emotionally from the people who had always been by her side. His relationship with his older sister, Gabriella, especially, began to deteriorate. Gabriella, who had always been the star of the family before Brenda's rise, began to feel overshadowed and neglected. And so, as Brenda shined in the fashion world spotlight, tensions within her family began to grow, casting shadows over her success. As Brenda's career took off, tensions in her family inevitably began to surface. Gabriella, her older sister, has always been the center of attention in the Anderson family. Intelligent, talented, and charismatic, Gabriella was proud of her parents and respected by everyone in the small town where they lived. However, Brenda's rapid rise to international stardom shook that balance. Gabriella, who had never felt threatened by the success of others, now found herself in an uncomfortable position, in the shadow of her younger sister. Feelings of insecurity and jealousy began to emerge, even if she was reluctant to admit it. Brenda, in turn, was not indifferent to the change in Gabriella's behavior. She always admired her older sister, who for her was a model of strength and independence. However, as Brenda became more and more famous, She noticed that the distance between them was growing. Gabriella seemed to be closing in, and her conversations, previously so natural and full of affection, were now brief and full of tension. Brenda tried to understand what was happening, but her busy life, full of commitments and travel, made any attempt at rapprochement difficult. Success, which should be a shared joy, was actually driving a wedge between the two. Gabriella, who had always been proud of her independence, began to feel that her own identity was being overshadowed by Brenda's brilliance. She noticed how people around her talked more about her sister's career than about their own achievements. Deep down, Gabriella knew her resentment wasn't fair, but it was hard to shake the feeling that she had been left behind. The pressure on his personal and professional life began to intensify. What was once a solid sisterhood relationship was now fraught with misunderstandings and painful silences. Gabriella found herself increasingly isolated, while Brenda shined on the world's stages. The Anderson sisters' parents, John and Margaret, noticed the growing tension between their daughters, but did not know how to intervene. They tried to be fair, supporting both of them as best they could, but Brenda's success was undeniable and difficult to balance. John, especially, saw with sadness how Gabriella, who had always been so strong, began to retrace herself. Margaret, on the other hand, tried to keep the family together, organizing meetings and encouraging her sisters to communicate, but without much success. The truth was that the physical and emotional distance between Brenda and Gabriella was becoming a chasm that was difficult to cross. The tension culminated one Christmas when Brenda, in an attempt to reconnect, returned home for the holidays. What should have been a warm reunion ended up turning into a silent confrontation. Gabriella, seeing her sister surrounded by attention, felt more isolated than ever. The frustration and resentment finally came to the surface in an outburst during dinner, where Gabriella expressed her anguish, accusing Brenda of having forgotten her family in her search for success. Brenda, shocked and hurt, didn't know how to respond. She had never wanted her career to cause pain to those she loved, but now she saw clearly the impact her absence had had. And so, what began as a family celebration ended in heartache and silence that would echo for a long time. Over time, Brenda's career reached new heights, taking her beyond the borders of the United States. Her visits to cities such as Tokyo, Paris, and Milan transformed her into a global icon, with her face appearing in campaigns for renowned brands and fashion shows on the most prestigious catwalks in the world. The young woman who had been discovered in a small Texas town was now revered by fashion critics and adored by millions of fans around the world. Each trip brought new opportunities and challenges, and Brenda found herself constantly on the move, living in luxurious hotels and spending entire days on photo sets or rehearsals. However, Brenda's success came with a high price. The glamorous life she led hid a deep loneliness. The constant traveling and pressure to stay relevant in the fashion industry began to take a toll on her emotional well-being. True friendships were rare, and the connections I made were often superficial and fleeting. Although she was surrounded by people all the time, Brenda felt a lack of genuine bonds, something that was made worse by the growing distance between her and her family. Calls home became less and less frequent, and when they did happen, they were short and formal. Brenda knew she was growing apart, but the intensity of her career kept her from reconnecting. In addition to loneliness, Brenda faced constant pressure to maintain her impeccable public image. The fashion industry was relentless, with expectations that were impossible to meet. Every public appearance, every photo posted on social media, was carefully scrutinized by critics and fans. Any mistake could jeopardize your career. Brenda, who had always been a perfectionist, began to feel the weight of these expectations. She found herself struggling to maintain a balance between her work and personal life, but the more she tried, the more she realized she was losing parts of herself in the process. What was once a passion was now beginning to turn into an exhausting obligation. Meanwhile, the distance between Brenda and her family only grew. Gabriella, who had already expressed her resentment, became more and more withdrawn. Brenda wanted to repair the relationship, but didn't know where to start. With each new trip, she promised herself that she would find time to visit her family, but the demands of her career always ended up imposing themselves. The few times he managed to return home were marked by superficial conversations, where the discomfort was palpable. Brenda felt like she was losing what mattered most, but at the same time, she was trapped in the frenetic cycle of her professional life. Eventually, Brenda herself began to question the choices she had made. Despite all the success and recognition, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The emptiness he felt couldn't be filled with fame or money. It was a longing for something deeper, something she had lost along the way. And so, as she walked the most glamorous catwalks and posed for the cameras of the most prestigious photographers, Brenda wondered if the price she was paying was worth it. She began to realize that to find the peace she so desperately wanted, she would need to do more than just move forward. She would need to confront the choices that led her there and perhaps find her way back home. While Brenda stood out on international catwalks, Gabriella faced a very different reality. After her sister's emotional separation, Gabriella found herself increasingly alone and struggling to find her own place in the world. Without the shine and recognition that surrounded Brenda, Gabriella began to question her own worth. The pressure to excel in her career, combined with the pain of watching her sister walk away, became a difficult burden to bear. Gabriella, who had always been a strong and independent person, began to feel lost, as if her life was in the background, overshadowed by Brenda's shadow. Gabriella's situation became even more complicated when she entered an abusive relationship. At first, it seemed like she had finally found someone who understood her, but it quickly became clear that things weren't what they seemed. The relationship, which should have been a source of support, became yet another source of pain and suffering. Gabriella found herself trapped in a cycle of manipulation and emotional abuse, where her self-esteem, already fragile, was gradually destroyed. She didn't know who to turn to, as the distance between her and Brenda was great, and Gabriella didn't want to worry her parents, who were already dealing with their own difficulties. Gabriella's isolation intensified. She began to withdraw from friends and family, hiding the truth about what was happening in her life. The few people who noticed the change in her behavior were unable to break through the barrier that Gabriella had built around herself. She felt ashamed and helpless, unable to ask for help. The brightness that once characterized her was replaced by a shadow of sadness and fear. The pain of seeing her sister living a life she could never imagine for herself, combined with the abuse she faced, sent Gabriella into a state of deep depression. Gabriella's internal tension reached its peak when she decided to disappear. Without leaving a trace, Gabriella abandoned her life and disappeared. The decision was a silent cry for help, a desperate attempt to escape a reality that had become unbearable. Her parents were devastated, and Brenda, upon discovering her sister's disappearance, was overcome by a wave of guilt and despair. Gabriella, who had always been the rock of the family, was now lost, and no one knew where to find her. What began as a search for identity and recognition ended in a spiral of self-destruction that threatened not only Gabriella's life, but also the stability of the entire Anderson family. For Brenda, Gabriella's disappearance was an urgent call to reality. For the first time, she realized how far she had become from her family and how much the glamorous life she was leading had blinded her to the real problems of those who mattered most. Concern for Gabriella overcame any other commitment, and Brenda knew she needed to find her sister before it was too late. The career, the fashion shows, all of this lost importance given the need to reconnect with her family and save Gabriella from the abyss into which she had fallen. Gabriella's disappearance was the shock Brenda needed to reevaluate her life and priorities. Without thinking twice, she decided to interrupt her career at the height of her success to return home and look for her sister. To many, this decision seemed thoughtless. After all, Brenda was at the top of the fashion industry, with valuable contracts and a schedule full of international commitments. But for Brenda, nothing mattered more than Gabriella's safety and well-being. For the first time in a long time, Brenda felt like she needed to put her family above all else, even if it meant sacrificing the career she worked so hard to build. Upon returning to Texas, Brenda was faced with a difficult reality. The family home, once a place of comfort, was now shrouded in an atmosphere of sadness and despair. Her parents, John and Margaret, were visibly shaken, worried about Gabriella's whereabouts and uncertain about what the future held. Brenda felt an overwhelming weight of guilt when she saw the state her family was in, and began to question all her choices. Why did it take so long to realize what really mattered? Regret consumed her, but she knew she couldn't afford to wallow in self-pity. She had a mission to accomplish. Brenda immediately began searching for clues that could lead to Gabriella's whereabouts. She visited the places her sister used to frequent, spoke to her remaining friends, and even hired a private detective to help with the search. With each day that passed without news, the anguish increased. Brenda knew that time was crucial, and the fear that something terrible had happened to Gabriella constantly haunted her. But despite the difficulties, Brenda didn't give up. She felt like it was somehow her responsibility to find her sister, like that was the only way to atone for her past mistakes. During this search, Brenda began to realize how little she knew about Gabriella's life in recent years. The missed calls, the superficial conversations, all of it now seemed like unforgivable negligence. She blamed herself for not having noticed the signs that Gabriella was in trouble. But the search also brought out a new determination in Brenda. She was willing to do anything to bring Gabriella back, and that meant facing not only the outside world, but also the ghosts within that had taken her away from her family. Brenda began to see this mission as an opportunity to reconnect not only with Gabriella, but with herself. Finally, after weeks of incessant searching, Brenda got a lead that took her to a poor area of the city, where she found Gabriella living in precarious conditions. The reunion was a moment of intense relief and pain. Gabriella, worn out and emotionally dejected, seemed a shadow of the woman Brenda knew. Brenda felt a mixture of sadness and guilt, but also immense gratitude for having found her sister alive. She knew the road to recovery would be long, but she was determined to help Gabriella rebuild her life, and in doing so, perhaps find her own redemption as well. The reunion between Brenda and Gabriella was one of the most intense and emotional moments both had ever experienced. When Brenda finally found Gabriella, her older sister was almost unrecognizable. The difficult life he had led in recent months had left deep marks, both physical and emotional. Gabriella, who had always been the strong and resolute figure of the family, now seemed fragile, as if all her strength had been drained. Upon seeing Brenda approaching, Gabriella's eyes filled with tears, reflecting a mixture of relief, shame, and pain. The distance that had created between the two sisters over the years seemed to dissolve at that moment, giving way to a connection that, although wounded, still existed. Brenda, upon seeing the state Gabriella was in, felt an overwhelming wave of guilt and sadness. She approached slowly, as if afraid that any sudden movement would break what was left of her sister. When they finally came face to face, Brenda couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged Gabriella with all the strength she had, as if that hug could erase all the lost time and heal all the wounds. Gabriella, initially resistant, finally gave in and let herself be carried away by the warmth of Brenda's embrace. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't alone, that there was still someone who cared about her. The two sisters stayed there, hugging each other, for long minutes, without saying a word. The emotions that overflowed at that moment were so many that words seemed insufficient. When they finally walked away, Brenda looked into Gabriella's eyes and, with a choked voice, apologized. She apologized for not having been there, for having let herself get carried away by the glow of fame, and for not realizing how much Gabriella needed her. Gabriella, in turn, also expressed her regret, acknowledging that she had withdrawn and not allowed Brenda to help her when she needed it most. Those words, although painful, were necessary for both of them to begin rebuilding the relationship that had been so shaken. The path to reconciliation, however, would not be easy. Gabriella still carried many scars, both from the abusive relationship and the difficulties she faced when trying to survive alone. She knew she needed time to heal, and Brenda was willing to provide whatever support she needed. Brenda insisted that Gabriella return home with her, where she could receive the care and attention she so desperately needed. Gabriella, although hesitant at first, ended up agreeing. She knew that, alone, it would be very difficult to recover, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she could trust someone. Returning home was an important step for both of them. For Brenda, it was a chance to make amends for past mistakes and reconnect with the sister she always loved. For Gabriella, it was the beginning of a healing process, where she could finally leave behind the pain and trauma she carried. When they arrived home, they were greeted with the warmth and love of their parents, who were eager to help Gabriella recover and rebuild family ties. And so, although the road ahead was full of challenges, the sisters knew that together they could overcome anything. Gabriella's return home marked the beginning of a process of reconciliation and healing for the Anderson sisters. Back in her family environment, surrounded by her parents' love and Brenda's unconditional support, Gabriella began to take the first steps towards rebuilding her life. However, the path to full reconciliation was neither simple nor immediate. There were many open wounds, hurt accumulated over the years, and a mutual need for understanding that would require time, patience, and, above all, sincerity. The two sisters knew that, in order to move forward, they would need to confront the past and the choices that kept them apart. The first weeks were marked by deep and intense conversations. Brenda and Gabriella were finally able to express their feelings without fear of judgment or retaliation. Brenda admitted how much she regretted moving away from her family, blinded by the glare of fame and the demands of her career. She recognized that in pursuing her dreams, she ended up neglecting those who mattered most, especially Gabriella. In turn, Gabriella shared the pain she had bottled up for so long, the feeling of being left behind, the loneliness she felt as Brenda conquered the world, and the despair that led her to become involved in a destructive relationship. These conversations, although difficult, were essential for the sisters to begin rebuilding their relationship. Through sincerity and empathy, Brenda and Gabriella began to understand the reasons behind each other's choices, realizing that, in many moments, both were victims of circumstances and external pressures. Forgiveness, both for themselves and for each other, began to emerge as a light at the end of the tunnel, guiding them to a new stage in their lives. Over time, the wounds began to heal, and what once seemed like an unbridgeable gulf between them was filled with renewed love and understanding. In addition to conversations, daily coexistence helped to strengthen bonds that had been weakened over the years. Brenda and Gabriella began to rediscover the little things they had always enjoyed doing together, like cooking the recipes they learned from their mother, watching old movies on Saturday nights, and taking walks in the countryside around the house. These moments, although simple, were extremely meaningful to both of them. They served as reminders of what really mattered and how much they had lost by allowing distance and misunderstandings to separate them. The reconciliation between the sisters also had a positive impact on the rest of the Anderson family. John and Margaret, who had long been worried about the deterioration of the relationship between their daughters, were finally able to breathe a sigh of relief when they saw that Brenda and Gabriella were getting closer again. The atmosphere in the house became lighter and more welcoming, with the presence of the two sisters united. The family, which previously seemed ready to collapse under the weight of so many tensions and secrets, now began to rise again, finding strength and unity in love and forgiveness. Brenda and Gabriella knew that there was still a long way to go, but they were ready to travel it together, strengthened by the bond that, despite all the difficulties, had never been completely broken. As the reconciliation between Brenda and Gabriella progressed, a new chapter began to unfold in the Anderson family story, one that would bring long-buried secrets to the surface. John Anderson, the family patriarch, has always been a man of few words, preferring to keep the most delicate matters secret. However, with the atmosphere of honesty and healing that permeated the home, he felt the time had come to reveal a truth he had held back for years. On a quiet afternoon, John gathered the family in the living room and, with a serious face, told them something that would change the family dynamic forever. John revealed that, years before marrying Margaret, he had had a relationship with another woman, a past passion that, until then, remained unknown to everyone. From this relationship, a son, Gustavo, was born, who John had kept secret, fearing the consequences that this revelation would bring to his family. The shock was immediate. Brenda and Gabriella, who were already dealing with their own wounds, were stunned to discover they had a half-sibling. Margaret, although she already knew about Gustavo's existence, had always kept the secret out of respect for John's desire to protect the family unit. Gustavo, who was now an adult man, had grown up knowing about John's existence, but always from a distance. He never had a close relationship with his father, but in recent years, he began to feel the need to fill the void left by the absence of a father figure in his life. It was then that Gustavo decided to look for John, hoping to better understand his own story and, perhaps, build a connection with the family he never knew. John, when contacted by Gustavo, realized that he could no longer hide the truth. He knew that, to move forward, he would need to bring Gustavo into his life and face the consequences of this secret. The revelation deeply shook Brenda and Gabriella. They were just beginning to rebuild their bonds, and now they found themselves facing a new reality. A reality that included a brother they never knew existed. Emotions were conflicting. There was curiosity, but also fear of what this would mean for the family. John, realizing the confusion and pain his words had caused, asked for patience and understanding. He knew he had made mistakes, but he hoped that, just as Brenda and Gabriella had found a way to reconcile, the family could also welcome Gustavo and, together, heal the wounds of the past. In the days that followed, Brenda and Gabriella reflected on what this new chapter meant for them. After much discussion and reflection, they decided that the best way would be to meet Gustavo and understand his story. After all, he was also part of the Anderson family, and denying him would be perpetuating the same mistakes of the past. With the support of Margareth, who always kept her heart open, Brenda and Gabriella prepared to meet Gustavo. They knew that the journey to accepting and integrating this new family member would not be easy, but they were willing to try, recognizing that sometimes healing and redemption come from unexpected places. When the day of the meeting finally arrived, the Anderson household was enveloped in an atmosphere of anticipation and nervousness. Brenda and Gabriella didn't know what to expect when meeting Gustavo, the brother who until recently was a complete stranger to them. John, who bore the weight of responsibility for so many years of secrecy, was particularly anxious. He knew that that moment would be decisive for the family, and he hoped that welcoming Gustavo would be the first step towards healing the wounds that his absence had caused. Margareth, always the mediator, tried to remain calm, believing that love and understanding could overcome any obstacle. Gustavo arrived at the Anderson family home with mixed feelings. He was also nervous, but determined to meet his sisters and establish some kind of bond with his father who, until then, had been a distant figure in his life. Upon walking through the door, Gustavo was greeted by John, who hugged him with sincerity and emotion. That hug, which had been denied for so many years, was a symbol of reconciliation and a silent request for forgiveness. Brenda and Gabriella watched from a distance, trying to process the reality that they now had a brother. When they finally approached, the three exchanged a look full of uncertainty, but also hope. The first meeting was marked by a mix of emotions. Gustavo, despite his position as an outsider, demonstrated a maturity and understanding that surprised the sisters. He shared some of his story, explaining how he had grown up knowing about John but always feeling a gap in his life due to the absence of a paternal relationship. Brenda and Gabriella listened attentively, trying to understand Gustavo's point of view and how life had been for him, living on the margins of a family that he knew existed, but of which he could never be part. The sisters, who were previously afraid, began to feel empathy for Gustavo and the challenge he faced when searching for his family. As the day progressed, the initial tension dissipated, giving way to a feeling of relief and connection. Brenda, who always valued her family, began to see Gustavo not as a threat, but as an opportunity to expand this family circle that was in the process of reconstruction. Gabriella, in turn, was still dealing with her own internal conflicts, but she saw in Gustavo someone who, like her, had gone through difficulties and was looking for a place to belong. This identification was a crucial point for Gabriella to begin accepting Gustavo as part of the family. In the days that followed, Gustavo integrated himself into the Andersons' lives. He spent time with Brenda and Gabriella, learning about their family history and sharing his own experiences. Gustavo's presence brought a new dynamic to the house, a renewed energy that helped strengthen the bonds between everyone. John, who had feared this moment so much, felt a deep relief when he saw that his daughters were willing to welcome Gustavo and give him a chance to become part of the family. Gustavo's journey to acceptance was still beginning, but with each day that passed, he and his sisters discovered that, despite everything, there were more things that united them than separated them. And so, what started as a secret kept for years, was turning into a new beginning for the entire Anderson family. As the months passed, the Anderson family began to readjust and find a new balance. Gustavo's presence, initially a surprise, became a point of unity that helped strengthen family ties. Gustavo's acceptance by his sisters, Brenda and Gabriella, was an important milestone in this reconstruction. What began as a painful discovery full of uncertainty turned into an opportunity for growth and renewal for everyone. Brenda, who had spent so much time away due to her career, found the new family setup a reason to deeply reconnect with her roots. For Gabriella, the healing process was still ongoing, but Gustavo's presence and the continued support of Brenda and her parents made all the difference. She began to open up more, to trust again, and little by little, the wounds from the past began to heal. Gabriella also found an unexpected ally in Gustavo. He, who had also dealt with the absence of a father for most of his life, understood the feeling of being left behind. This mutual understanding created a special bond between them, further strengthening the family structure that was being rebuilt. Brenda, in turn, decided it was time to reevaluate her priorities. After spending so much time focused on her career, she realized that professional success did not replace the value of family relationships. She began to dedicate more time to her family, balancing her career with precious moments with her parents, Gabriella, and, now, Gustavo. Her international modeling career continued, but now Brenda made a point of returning home frequently, actively participating in family life. This change brought new meaning to her life, and she felt more complete and fulfilled than ever. The Anderson family, now complete, also began exploring new ways to reconnect with their origins. They began spending more time together, rediscovering old traditions and creating new memories. Family gatherings, outings, and even short trips became moments of celebration and strengthening bonds. The Anderson home, which had been the scene of so many tensions and conflicts, now vibrated with positive energy, where love, respect, and acceptance were the pillars of their coexistence. John and Margaret, who always dreamed of a united family, finally saw this dream come true. The future looked bright for the Andersons. Each member of the family, despite the difficulties they faced, found new strength in the union. They knew that although the past could not be changed, the future was in their hands. Together, Brenda, Gabriella, and Gustavo, alongside their parents, decided to move forward, leaving their sorrows behind and focusing on building a new chapter based on love, understanding, and forgiveness. And so, what began as a story of secrets, resentment, and estrangement turned into a powerful account of redemption, reconciliation, and new beginnings. Life sometimes presents us with unexpected moments that make us rethink everything: our choices, our priorities, and even who we really are. Brenda, when crossing that young woman's path in the rain, was forced to look inside herself and question the direction her life had taken. And you? Have you ever wondered if you are on the right path? Are you prioritizing what really matters? Maybe it's time to stop and reflect on the decisions you've made so far. If this story touched you and made you think, subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can continue to explore these questions and pursue a more authentic and meaningful life. Don't miss the opportunity to connect with what really matters. Start now.